two generations merge into one to spread the good news of God's personal love. With the help of other prominent Christian voices, the gospel is presented in an easy and open way. You just might get the answer to your prayers.
Good morning. I'm Caterina and I'm just so excited here today. I have some friends, a new friend, and Doug, who is my friend from Stony Brook, and we have Bridget here as well. Two young people, and I'm just so inspired right now. It's just going to be such a great show. We're going to be talking about some great topics such as the Lord of the Rings, such an exciting topic. I know a lot of people like it. Some people don't know about it. Like for me, I don't really know much about it. So Doug is going to share with us today what is that? Like what is that story and who the author is? So
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caterina. Well, I'm thrilled to talk about it because it's my favorite, I think, of all time. My favorite book that I've read so far.
Oh,
and
great.
Technically there are 6 books, but really it's known as a trilogy. And it was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was an Oxford professor of Anglo-Saxon literature in England. And he's a very famous scholar, quite apart from his work in the Lord of the Rings, in studying in Anglo-Saxon, which is Old English, and Middle English, but he wrote the Lord of the Rings in the 1950s, or it was published in the 1950s, and it's an epic story following the adventures of Hobbit and his friends, and they travel across the Middle Earth, which is basically an ancient, more fictional version of our world, Europe, and Tolkien fit the story into his larger mythology, which he'd been working on all his life from a young age in the 1920s, and actually starting with the First World War. And he was always fascinated with language and mythology, especially northern myth of Scandinavia and the Norse gods, and he was fluent in Old English and Old Norse and you name it, tons and tons of languages, Latin, Greek. But the Lord of the Rings is his story of the destruction of the One Ring.
One ring to rule them all.
In the story, the Dark Lord Sauron is basically a lieutenant of Satan in the story. There are more ancient legends that he wrote, in the old days of this fictional world, Middle Earth, that concerned, older stories. So it is very much in the Lord of the Rings a sense of history. This is a continuation of older myths. It's all seen through the Hobbit's eyes. They're short, little, half-height people that live in a peaceful place called the Shire. And this ring of power comes into the possession of one who doesn't know its full importance, and his name is Frodo, and he needs to travel to destroy it, because the Dark Lord needs this ring. He's used in the past to launch a war against the world, and it basically embodies sin and power, and anyone who uses it falls in corruption, and lust for power and for the ring, and they either need to hide it or destroy it to prevent Sauron from regaining it to take over the world and destroy the world.
So is Frodo a hobbit?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
He and his faithful servant Sam go to Mordor in the end to try to destroy the ring. And I don't want to give it away, but you have to read it.
Okay.
But it's well worth the read if you love poetry and mythology and adventure and beauty and all these things. And Tolkien put a very much of his Catholic faith into the writing, though it's not explicit in there. So many of the themes and characters embody a lot of Catholic ideas. For instance, there's the wizard Gandalf, who is basically he's called a wizard, but he is more like an angelic being sent to Middle-earth to help the inhabitants fight against evil, who is Sauron really in the Lord of the Rings, and he is a messenger sent by God to help the people, and he at one point falls and dies battling a demon from the deeps of a cave. They travel through the caverns to get on their quest to Mordor, the mines of Moria, and Gandalf falls and is later resurrected. So it's very, very
okay.
Christ-like figure.
Like, Doug, you gave it away. But he's resurrected.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
good.
Not one character in the Lord of the Rings, embodies Christ exactly, of course. But there's priest, prophet, kings all throughout. Aragorn is the king in exile, and he's another main character. And Frodo and Gandalf, they each have elements of very Christ-like qualities.
Like courage
and sacrifice, especially Aragorn and Frodo, but all of them really in some degree. It's
good.
Quite a deep and interesting and complex story.
That sounds exciting. And you said it was a trilogy, but there's actually 6 books?
Yeah, so it was published as a trilogy.
Oh, and then it continued.
It was just at the time it was more inexpensive to just publish them all, in 3 big volumes. It was really written in 6 books. Each book in the trilogy has 2. And it's interesting how it's written, because one book follows the stories of the adventures of a set of characters, and then the next book it flips over to the other ones that you haven't seen in a while. So you're kind of kept in suspense while you're reading. You don't know what's going on, with Frodo and Sam, and all the other. It's following the stories of the other characters. So it's very in that way you just don't want to stop reading.
Yeah, it's exciting because you're frustrated at the same time. You're like, I want to know what's going on, but you have to wait and you have to read the other stuff. So we have a person, a listener who's watching actually from Facebook Live, and he said the Eucharist and Lembas. So do you mind mentioning what that is? And,
sure.
How that connects? I don't know, and I'm getting really excited. I have to watch the movies and read the books. Do you recommend which one do you recommend? Reading the books first?
Books.
The books, yeah.
The movies are good, but books are always better.
Yeah, you can imagine and stuff. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, the Lembas is a great example too of it's Elvish way bread that they on their journey into the east, the Company of the Ring that set out from Rivendell passed through Lothlorien, which is like sort of a bastion of safety among the elves. They're high elves in the mythology, and they give the travelers bread to take with them on their journey, and they tell the hobbits that the more you live off of this bread alone, the stronger you get, and you can live with it. Just with that for weeks and weeks, and it'll last you. One bite will last a grown man enough for a day's march. So it's very, very interesting. I think later in the trilogy they say how as you depend more and more on it, you get stronger, and the need for other food and drink diminishes. So it's very much an allusion to the Eucharist.
Yeah, it's just hitting me in the head right now because in the Bible. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Those who come to me will never hunger, and those who drink shall not thirst. So that's very, under the radar, so to speak, that the elves are giving them this bread of life so that they can continue and do their noble duty to prevent evil from continuing in the world. So
right.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. So what, I know you wanted to mention how the Lord of the Rings really touched you and how that helped you grow closer to your faith. So, do you mind mentioning any favorite moments or just anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think the first thing was that just when I was in middle school, that's when I first started reading The Lord of the Rings, and I think reading about Tolkien's life, and even before reading the story, I was kind of entranced by his story. An English professor, and I was influenced by his. He made up many Elvish alphabets, and I've always been interested in writing and writing systems and language. So I think that down the line influenced me to study linguistics at Stony Brook, and the Lord of the Rings just. At the time, I wasn't Catholic, but it kind of set me up, I think. That
without you knowing.
Yeah. I remember thinking, oh, he's Catholic. How could Tolkien write all these beautiful things and he's wrong? Like, oh, no. But it was very... It's been interesting as a Catholic looking back at it now and rereading it and thinking about it now with a Catholic perspective to see just how... thoroughly Catholic. Of course it's Christian, but specifically Catholic, The Lord of the Rings is. And it's so organic and just wound in there, bound together through the story. Very much like our real world. Faith is always there. So
without us knowing, sometimes. Yeah.
But I think the language, his interest in language and its centrality to the story influenced me quite a bit. And of course Tolkien himself as an example, as a father and teacher, and he very much influenced me.
That's incredible. All the pieces are just coming together, because that influenced you later on with what you decided to study in Stony Brook, and just your journey towards Catholicism, and just all these pieces are coming into play, and that's amazing. And I was just thinking also that your confirmation saint is Saint Thomas More, who is also Anglo-Saxon, right?
Well, not Anglo-Saxon, but English.
English, okay.
A little later.
So I'll mention about that saint and why you picked him, and for those of us who may not know about that saint, who he was and what happened.
Oh, sure. Well, he was the Lord Chancellor of England in the 1500s, in 1529 under Henry VIII, and he was. This was at the time when Henry VIII was trying to get an annulment of his marriage and marry Anne Boleyn and have her queen. And of course, at that time England is Catholic. Most of Europe is Catholic. The Protestant Reformation started in Germany, and King Henry and Thomas More are on the same side at that point. Writing together against heresies that are springing up on the continent. And down the line, Thomas More doesn't take this oath of supremacy, which the King Henry wanted everyone to swear by, that made him. So in order to get the divorce, he had to make himself head of the church in England. So Thomas More wouldn't say yea or nay to it. He just kept silent and hoped that would be enough to imply that he was okay with it. But he didn't take the oath, and he and Bishop John Fisher of Rochester didn't either, and they're the two best known examples of people that didn't succumb to peer pressure or anything. And most people just took the oath to save their lives or just to stay on the king's good side. So in the end they didn't, and Thomas More was beheaded at the Tower of London in 1535. And he was made a saint in the last century, I think in the 1930s. Oh, wow. 1935.
And St. John Fisher as well.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Because was he beheaded?
I'm not, he might have been. I'm not sure, certain. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the king, he wanted an annulment so that he can marry somebody else, essentially, to have...
marry Anne Boleyn.
To have
children,
a child, to have a boy. Yep. Right? Is that how the story goes? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
In the end, Anne Boleyn gets, she gets beheaded too, but that's a little later.
Yeah. But thank you for sharing. That's a noble story of courage of the saints that, he stood up for what he believed in.
Yep.
And now he's a saint, so that's incredible.
Yeah, that's always influenced me, and even in high school, I always thought that was an amazing story of someone he never went against his conscience, what he knew to be right.
Mm-hmm.
and stuck with it, even though his own family, I think his daughter Margaret, wrote to him and said, just take the oath like we all did, keep what you want, what you really believe in your heart, and just sign away. But he couldn't do it.
He was like, no, then it's like you're giving
he'll have to be accountable before God at the end, Judgment Day. And he was very much into letting people, if they thought that's what they should do, then let them do it. He wasn't going to judge them, but he could only really hold himself accountable for what he did and said.
That's a really good reminder for all of us. And I know you were mentioning about the truth and the Dominican order, and that ties in really well with that. He was searching for the truth in a way, St. Thomas More, and wanted to stick up for his belief in the truth, and that, the king can't be the head of the church because he's not the Pope,
Right.
So that's really beautiful, inspiring story. So let's continue a little bit with the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
We'll go back a little bit. So what else? So would you recommend for those who haven't read the book to read it? And what are some other reasons why to enjoy and read it?
Well, a lot of people start with The Hobbit, and that's quite a different style. That was the first book he wrote in 1937, and it deals with the adventures of Bilbo, who's the main character, and he finds the ring in that story, which comes to be of importance in the Lord of the Rings. But it's a different style. It's, for some, preferable to the Lord of the Rings, but I would say if you're going to try reading the Lord of the Rings, stick with it. Don't give up, because there's a lot of long, poems, and some people see that and
they get bored, maybe.
Yeah, and there's a lot of what people seem to think are dry passages of just traveling, and I love it, but it's very descriptive. He describes everything, the countryside, and so you can really picture it as if it's right there. It really was, just as he said, the forests and the mountains and all the valleys and cities that they visit in the story.
So can you start reading The Lord of the Rings without having read The Hobbit first?
You could, yeah.
You could just go
There's
straight
sort
into
of separate stories. You kind of pick up on a lot of what happened, the important parts of The Hobbit, while you're reading the beginning of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it helps, and that's more of an easier children's book. It's much more popular for that in that genre. But yeah, I would suggest it.
Oh, okay.
It's different style, but yeah,
you get other things out of it too. I'm
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
Good. So let's also talk a little bit. I know we were mentioning before about the saints, and if you don't mind, I would like to share a little bit about my confirmation saint as well. Her name is Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. It was really interesting how I picked this saint. Usually we're supposed to pray a little bit more and discern like which saint is for you when it's time for confirmation. And I was in religion class, I think in like 6th grade, and I heard my teacher just mention like literally one or two sentences. She said, this is Saint Teresa of the Cross. She was martyred she died in the concentration camp with her sister in Auschwitz during the time of the Nazis, and she was Catholic, and I think that's all that I heard, and I was like, oh, that's it, that's the one. And I think just inside of me I was just inspired by the courage and how she like became a martyr for her faith. Her story was that she was actually born Jewish. Her name was Edith Stein, and she was born Jewish, and during her life she studied philosophy, and she studied with some German philosophers, very known and prominent philosopher. I forget his name at the time, but she became atheist because of philosophy and her struggle and her search for the truth too. She became atheist, and then what happened was she read Saint Teresa of Avila's biography, I think it was, or autobiography, and she, in her heart, she felt really touched. She's like, this is it. This is love. This is the truth, what she wrote about God and his love. And then she became a nun. I'm not sure. I believe a Carmelite nun, but she became a religious. Well, she converted. She became Catholic, and then she became a nun, which was amazing. And then her sister as well became a faithful person in the Catholic the faith. And then because I guess of their background, and the Nazis found out about them, and then they were taken to Auschwitz. And I believe Saint Teresa didn't fight that she was taken. I think one of her quotes was, "I'm willing to become like a martyr, or that's fine, to be taken." So then they both died, and for me, I think their story of courage also was what really touched me. That they became Catholic, and just that they died for it's a very like noble thing, and that I was very blessed to be able to go last year to Poland to Auschwitz. Unfortunately, to see the site and to walk around where the terrible things happen. And it was really you could see right there the terrible sin and just the evil that could exist in our world, what happened in history. And I just coming back home and just reflecting on that experience, walking around and just not really knowing where exactly she died, or where exactly her gravesite is, but just we can be happy and rejoice in their example, and like what they did for us, and just that God makes it all work for the good. And we just can just pray for their souls, for their family, and just remember to try to like not let that happen again. So that was, I guess, a little bit about the saint that I picked. And so yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about that and how that inspired me. And we all could live up to our saints, to our names, and they help us and they guide us on this journey. We pray. It's like praying to a friend for help, and that's really good. And did you guys want to, I guess, did you guys know about Saint Teresa before today?
I did know a little bit about her.
Oh, okay.
I actually also went to Auschwitz and saw the concentration camp there, and so I remember them when we were there, people talking about Saint Edith Stein and also Saint Maximilian Kolbe.
Right.
I think
Mm-hmm.
we saw where his cell was.
Mm-hmm.
It is it is crazy to that they were willing to give up their lives and sacrifice so much for the truth, for the faith, and to be that witness. So it is really cool to be able to pray to them for courage and strength.
Yeah, St. Maximilian Kolbe, he's another great one, right?
Yeah.
He was a Franciscan, and actually I found out he also had a radio show, and he was speaking about the Lord, and I think was involved in journalism and a newspaper. And he didn't fight as well when they were starting to take him. His friars were like, "Oh, hide, they're coming," try to save yourself. And he's like, "No, it's okay, if they come." And he just, I think, said a blessing and then went on his way. So it was, if we were in that situation, what would we do? That's, I guess that was God's grace he needed to go there to save the other person. That he went. Another man was chosen to be killed, unfortunately, but he was a husband, and he said, "No, please, don't take me." And then Father Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who's a priest, said, I'll do it. He has a family. And that is just so incredible that in just one moment he knew the truth, and and they say that he lived for a long time in the starvation cell, and he would secretly celebrate Mass, and there would be singing from the bunk, and just all this terrible stuff going on around him, but it was just so incredible. Like, he's just such an inspiring saint that I wanted to mention as well. So I just wanted to say thank you all for listening, and we hope you have a great weekend. And that's it. So thank you, listeners. God bless you, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.